kind of exercises would you do like with someone from a martial arts background to like intro them to what you're trying to do?
I can help them shift how they're orienting anchoring. If we drill a certain move, but if we drill it and I have them focus in a certain way and then help them shift their focus and now drill it again and have them, see the difference. Also feel how the tension will shift in their body and then they'll be able to perform a move differently.
Would you say it's like looking more out from body than from mind, or like what's kind of the orientation shift you're talking about?
I mean, there's a whole bunch of them. You know how I've talked about with when you're driving a car, when you know how to drive and the conditions are fine, you're in this wide focus and your body and or your car are figure, but you anchor in ground, right? You anchor in the environment outside of you, obviously, and primarily the road and your lane, right? The more freaked out you get, right? The more dicey the road conditions, or if you're a brand new driver, your tendency is going to be to anchor in figure and not ground. And that's this insecure orientation that inhibits function, right? Or you're learning to ride a bike and you're focused on, you're like looking down and you're focused on like the bike and
right.
Your body. It's like once you get good at it, that's in the background of your awareness and you're anchored out in the environment. So same with martial arts, obviously. It's like the more intimidated you are by the opponent, the more you're gonna anchor your attention on yourself instead of anchoring your attention on what you're trying to do. Like what a lot of people tend to do is to anchor in their head and or in their face because, it's their face that they're not wanting to have get hit, right? But right. If they anchor there, then they tend to immobilize and fixate their face and have everything kind of be mobile except their face, right? Or except their head. And in martial arts, you need to not have your head be stationary. Your head needs to be on the move so that you can bob and weave and dodge punches and kicks. And so it's a different way of moving to be real mobile with your head and shoulders. And it means you got to anchor in your core. You got to anchor down more in the abdomen. And there's a bunch of stuff with footwork where most people will get real heavy footed. And it's like, really, you need to have your feet on the move like crazy.
So in both cases, if you're anchoring your head, you're shifting, down into your core. If you're anchoring your feet, you're shifting up into your core. So everything's moving around that, right?
Right.
I just know there's a thing you do where you have somebody walk in front of a mirror and you can see what part of the body is static.
Right.
Like what part the rest of the body is moving around. And that may be an indication of some kind of trauma. It may be just something they're fixated on, like you're saying. But ideally, when you're walking, the thread or the line of continuity is around the core and the body's moving around that, right?
Right.
I just think that's a really helpful. I mean, I had only done that with you recently because I was so in my head that it took a while to even think about anything else. But seeing that is kind of open up a lot of like awareness for me around like what isn't moving around that, And it's also like you can just see people on the street who like their whole body is moving around their left shoulder.
Right.
It's just kind of an interesting exercise. So you see that with martial artists, and you're saying that the consequences of that when you bring it to a physical activity are pretty severe.
Yeah.
And it's almost like it seems to me, would you say that someone who's like heavy-footed has some type of trauma associated with their feet?
Well, I'd say it with either zero or first chakra.
What's zero?
The feet.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean injury to the feet. It means that the first chakra is oriented to the environment, the physical environment.
Instead of to itself?
Yeah, instead of the first chakra, it becomes to your physical body. So the interface between your physical body and the environment. So if the chakra is an organ of perception, and the chakra, it's a field, right? And then that field interacts with the environment. And information then is relayed from that field up into the person's mind. In the same way that, if you touch something with your hand, there's sensory information that your hand picks up and relays it to your mind, right? So the field sort of feels out into a particular environment and relays information. And the zero chakra is going to relay a type of information that has to do with the environment itself. The first chakra, the way the brain is interpreting, or the mind is interpreting the information that the first chakra comes, is that the first chakra information is about your body. And when your mind is interpreting information about the interaction between first and zero, it's interpreting information about the interaction between your body and the environment. It's analogous to, let's say you're looking at something, right? And so you have visual information about that thing, but then you reach out and touch it. And it's like, well, now you're getting kinesthetic information instead of just visual information.
Right.
And you're visually going, oh, my hand is touching that thing. But your hand doesn't know that thing. Your hand just knows itself,
Right. It's got to be interpreted. It just has, you're interpreting the relation between the outside world and that physical sense, your physical sense of it.
So, if to do an exercise real quick, if you bring your attention to the room that you're in and just notice stuff like how, the size of the room, objects in the room, it can be the temperature of the room or how much light is in the room, or you just kind of orient to, okay, what's going on in this room, right? And you're sort of, you can pay attention to the room as the room is, whether you're there or not, right?
Right.
It's like, okay, we're not talking about you, we're talking about what's the room like.
Just the room itself.
And then you can bring your attention to you, irrespective of the room. And let's just say your physical body. And what I'm saying is that the room is zero chakra, meaning one of the things you're using to feel out the room is your zero chakra. To perceive the room, feel out the room, it's that idea that we're using these fields to feel stuff out, right? This idea of what's the vibe, right? It's like, well, what's the vibe of the room? And it's like, well, you're literally using a field of yours to feel into the room and get the vibe of the room, and that zero chakra field is picking up this information. So, again, that idea of Cartesian perception, and even with your eyeballs, you're just taking information in as far as the light bouncing off of objects, right? As we know, it's like, well, you could, with instrumentation, we could use sonar and we can bounce sound waves off of the environment and get a sense of what's going on in the room. And so there's these different ways that you're picking up what's going on in this environment around me. And I'm saying that one of the main ways that you can pick up the vibe in the room is with your zero chakra. It's expanding the field out and interacting with the room and then sending back sensory information as if it was sonar or as if it was whatever type of technology. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because there's a sense of space you feel that's not dependent on sight.
Right.
I think that's kind of what I heard in what you're saying. That, and you can just think about it like the fact that there's a wall behind you, even though you can't see it, right? You can feel a sense of space that's not dependent on your, usual senses.
Yeah, and if, let's say you're sitting on a airplane or a bus or something and the window's closed, it's like, well, when the bus starts to move, It's like, well, how do you know that? Well, it's not sight, because when you look around, the interior of the bus isn't changing.
Right.
It's like you have this proprioception, you have this sense of balance. So there's all these different mechanisms that we have where we're feeling out our environment, and we tend to be focused on the gross anatomy, but the subtle anatomy is doing way more than we think it is. And we're going off of information that our subtle field is picking up way more than we realize, way more than we consciously register. But whether you're consciously paying attention to that or not, it's happening.
Right.
Just like you're using your inner ear mechanism to balance yourself, whether you know that or not.
Can you say a little bit more? I mean, I'd never heard of the concept of the zero chakra.
Yeah, you don't hear about it much.
I hear the distinction you're making between it and other chakras because of it has kind of like a hybrid role. It seems like, in that there's both a physical and an energetic aspect to it that you're getting. It's interpreting. There's like the physical perception of your feet and the energetic sense of space.
Yeah, but the physical experience of your feet occurs via the first chakra. That's the thing. A lot of people think, well, what I'm feeling up in my chest, that would be heart chakra. No, that's first chakra still.
Anything in the body.
Yeah, the physical body is first chakra.
You skipped over that in our discussion of the chakras, Lance. We have to go back and edit that. So I guess talk a little bit more about zero chakra then. Is it connection to ground? Because I keep seeing these images in my mind as you're talking about it.
It is ground.
It is ground.
It's so tricky because trying to put this stuff in linear terms, it's like trying to talk about electricity and trying to talk about quantum mechanics and stuff. Each chakra is a lens that has a perspective, meaning it's a window onto a certain terrain. The terrain that the zero chakra is a window onto, or a field that perceives a certain terrain, that terrain is the physical environment. The first chakra is a window onto your physical body, meaning it's sending information that pertains to what's going on in your body. That's how the brain interprets it. So the first chakra can't see zero chakra terrain. If you think of a spectrum of vibratory frequencies, the zero chakra sees a frequency range or a bandwidth that only the zero chakra can see. So then it's, well, what territory is that the zero chakra sees? Well, it's the physical environment.
It feels tied to like the confusion of like object relations in the mind.
No doubt. Yeah, because the information we get with our chakra, then we got to try to discern, like the first chakra information, like I've said before, as a little kid, the Cheerio and the Matchbox car and your finger, there's no discernment as to which one is self and which one is edible. All three are edible when you're sitting in your high chair.
Yeah.
and you literally try to eat all three.
And you get older, you just assume you are all three.
It's funny. There's some kind of funny correlation that could be made between. I'm picturing my '69 Impala that I bought last year as part of my midlife crisis, and how I'm deriving a lot of identity out of that these days, and probably started with some like Matchbox car that was on my high chair tray.
Oh, funny. I wonder.
It's like, wait, I eat this one. I am that thing, and I.
I think it's interesting, this idea of zero chakra. So because we got to it thinking about an exercise of what to do, how to work with people in martial arts, right? And the relationship between zero and first chakra, and trying to develop or trying to improve performance.
Yeah, there's a ton of, I mean, I'd love to make a whole instructional series that would apply to all sports, for example, and or all physical activities, really.
Yeah.
Just around this stuff with regard to, it's like the tensegrity thing applies to everything, but so does this idea of anchoring and orienting.
I remember when you were talking to me about like the Sufi maps for the body and for like essence points, and like I was going and looking up just images of that, and like there's this one image of you pointed me to it. I can't remember what it's called, but it's like it's got all these kind of symbolic elements to it. But the feet of this person are like tree trunks, so like roots growing into ground, right? And so kind of the talk a little bit more, because you said that zero chakra is ground. And I think that like all of these meditative exercises point to feeling the connection to ground through your feet. And that there's bringing awareness to that is pretty profound and definitely related to what you're talking about, but I haven't heard it in this context before.
It's tricky because the word ground, there's actual gross level physical ground, like earth, which is different than the primordial ground, which is the collective unconscious. So a lot of times you'll see the primordial ground or the collective unconscious being ground with a capital G, which is different than, earth or floor or that kind of ground.
But both, I think the gross ground is used as a reference for connection to that in exercises. I think there's a hookup that can happen there when you notice a physical ground, like you really are aware of it, that puts you closer to being in touch with primordial ground.
I think that's true to a degree. However, someone who's experiencing mania or schizophrenia or anxiety, often getting in touch with the physical ground will actually help them to ground the primordial ground into the physical so as not to have their mind be flooded. So the physical ground and or the zero chakra should act as a grounding point for the primordial ground. You know how that idea that, again, I keep wanting to study more about electricity so I can know how to use the right terms. But you know how they say if you were standing on, like if you're in the water, you're in more danger with regard to lightning than you are on land, because the water's going to conduct that electricity more, right?
Right.
Or just the idea of grounding an electrical appliance. It's like, what is that, right? What does that mean to ground something? And as I understand it, it's the flow of electrons has someplace to go. There's a medium that will take the electrons, right? It'll receive the output of electrons. And when there's a buildup of, what do you call it, free electrons, but there's not a medium, then a charge builds, and then it looks to arc, right? It looks to connect. So this happens when we get all heated up, right? If you're all pissed off or whatever, and your field has built this charge, and it's looking to express that charge, it's looking to conduct, I think is the right word, conduct that charge through something, right?
Right.
And it's like, all right, do I do that through my fist into the wall? Do I do it by saying, fuck you, Jeff? Do I do it by sending it deep at my own sense of self, where I prefer fuck you, Jeff, to and my own deep sense of self.
Right. You were trying to rein it in and you couldn't. You're like, no.
But I'm more the, psychopathic character structure and you're more the masochistic. So that's just the way the energy tends to flow.
However you want to get over, that you're a dick.
It's just for good reason.
Never helped you sleep at night, Lance.
But so it's this idea of the energetics moving like that. When you apply that to the subtle realm, right? It's like, oh man, there's just this shit show of charge flying all over the place.
For sure.
And so then you have this energy body and you have this zero chakra, and the zero chakra is again, I don't know the correct terminology, but the connector point or the something from the primordial ground into the physical world, right? It takes it. It's like as with everything on this podcast, it's all, I'm just talking out of my ass, but the way it seems to me, in the same way that water will condense. And my understanding of condensation is there's this moisture in the air, this H2O that's in a gas state, that because of a temperature differential, the water molecules condense and go through a state change from a gas to a liquid and show up as water droplets on your glass, right? That it's like your zero chakra ideally is taking primordial ground gaseous. The analogy would be more gas state energy, and it condenses into actual zero chakra energy.
Okay.
So it's like the chakra in that process, it grounds the activity of the energy. It ideally brings it into what's called a ground state, right? With energy, there's what's called a ground state with energy, which means that you don't have that frenetic movement of it, right? It grounds. And so if things are working right, your chakra functions as this organ, this mechanism that can take that energy that's flying all over the place and ground it into the chakra. And that happens on all these different levels. So for example, even on the mental level, right? All these ideas that I'm throwing around all over the place in this incoherent way, you're sitting there with your mental chakra trying to ground it. You're trying to hold it, you're trying to contain it, and then you're trying to organize it enough to where, boom, it grounds and you go, oh, okay.
That's a good analogy.
And then whatever, it's a whole different topic to say, well, wait a minute, what kind of structure did you just ground it into? Because you might have successfully grounded it.
That's my problem, though.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I imagine you spend a lot of time worrying about that, but there's
exactly.
not much you can do.
Right.
If you want to learn more about the Dimension Approach, please visit dimensionapproach.com.